Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you call home. A few housekeeping items before we get started. All of our attendees are on mute, but we still like to keep our webinars as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll try to answer those as they come in. We'll also be closing the session with live Q&A. So let's get started. Thanks so much for joining us today, joining our webinar today, Skip to the End, Accelerating Root Cause Analysis. I'm Kyle Benaz, Director of Marketing at Netreo, and I'll be your host today. As mentioned, please send any and all questions, and I'll make sure we get them answered for you. I'm joined today by James Mancini, Netreo co-founder and principal solution architect. So today we'll be exploring the best ways to accelerate root cause analysis of IT issues and how to ensure those issues don't happen again. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to James. Take it away.
Thanks, Kyle. So some of the common challenges that our customers tell us about in finding the root cause of a problem are things that you might be very familiar with. Things like too many false alarms. They can cause you to miss what the real root cause of a problem is, or actually lose it in the flood of alerts that are happening during a mass outage. It's also easy to make lots of changes during a crisis while you're focusing on restoring service. But if your incident process doesn't have a way to manage them, you can easily end up without the information you need to do a proper root cause analysis after the fact. Many organizations don't properly document their findings and changes during an incident, and it's usually because no one has been specifically tasked with that function. In fact, while it's usually assumed that everyone does root cause analysis, our experience has been that surprisingly few organizations actually have a formal approach or a policy regarding how to do it. Sometimes there's an obvious cause to a problem, but very often that's not the root cause. And false root causes can cause you to spend money and time on solutions that don't ultimately work and then end up experiencing the same or substantially similar problems again and again without a clear way to break that cycle. So if you've watched our webinars before, you've probably heard me say this. Your organization needs a plan to deal with incidents as they happen. And any good incident plan includes a requirement and a process for root cause analysis. One of the most common reasons an incident can't be tracked at the root cause is a lack of documentation. And in this context, documentation includes carefully recording all of the changes that get made as part of an incident recovery and not just, the as-built state of the equipment. The best way to make sure that gets done is to assign specific roles during an incident, and we'll talk briefly about what the key roles for that are. Also remember that everything done in an emergency is very likely to inject new defects into the systems, and too many issues have been resolved only to impact other systems that weren't previously affected. So reviewing everything you changed during the incident will significantly improve the quality of the changes that you implement and prevent these problems from happening again. So if we talk about assigning specific roles, we need to understand which roles we're going to rely on in a crisis. And at a minimum, we suggest 3 different major roles. Each of these roles plays a large part in the action plan as well. And the 3 key roles are the technical lead, the service lead, and the incident lead. And obviously, depending on the size and complexity of your organization, your situation might require a more specialized role as well, or even assistance to the leads to help organize conference bridges, meetings, and manage the communications between the teams. Let's drill into what those roles are and what they should be expected to do. So a technical lead is a specialist or a subject matter expert, and their role is to diagnose and lead a problem resolution effort in their component area, like storage or network or DBMS. They must also reach out and coordinate with other technical leads to solve those issues that lie between specialties, like between the database and storage, for example. And these should be highly capable senior engineers in their specialty, but they also need to have a full understanding of the production environment, and any given incident might need multiple technical leads depending on the scope of the problem. The service lead, it has the job of directing the restoration efforts and setting priorities based on their knowledge of what's most important to the business. So this should also be an experienced engineer or manager, but specifically one who understands the system aspects and delivery requirements for the services that are being impacted. They should also be familiar with and able to direct service restoration routines or procedures, like a cluster restart, for example. But they should also have full knowledge of all of the related service and potential downstream impacts that need to be considered or addressed, and they'll know which business units and contacts have to be engaged to minimize the impact through mitigation procedures while the incident is being worked from the technical side. Now, with incident leads, it's best if a single incident has a single incident lead. So effectively, there's a captain on the ship to direct all the resources where they're needed most. And the incident lead will drive all of the problem resolution actions as needed and direct the teams as to exactly what they should be doing. And this should also be an experienced manager, but should be someone with command skills and incident management background who really understands the problem diagnosis and resolution process. Because you want someone whose general knowledge and experience extends from the systems monitoring and diagnostic tools that are available in your organization, all the way up to the application and infrastructure components and engineering tools, as well as a basic understanding of the services that IT is delivering to the business. And since they're the ones calling the shots during the incident, this is also the person who should be made responsible for collecting the data we're going to need for the final root cause analysis after the fact. Now, during a major incident, it's very important to make sure that we're not making our lives more difficult when we go to find the root cause. There are some best practices that we recommend to accelerate root cause analysis by building it into the incident management process from the beginning. One of the most important is to make one change at a time and track all the changes. Now, this is the most common reason why a problem can't be tracked to its original cause. Either you've got multiple teams making simultaneous changes and can't be sure which one fixed the problem, or you've made changes that weren't logged. The incident lead must keep careful track of what each team is doing and when and in what order. You should always focus on restoring service first, but document possible root causes as you come across them. Remember, most root cause analysis and work comes long after the service is restored. We also need to ensure that configuration information is documented and maintained through the changes, because we want to be able to see if there are changes that may have caused the problem before the incident happened, and afterwards find out what changes were made to resolve them to prevent possible future incidents. Now, if you can revert a change and go back to the last known stable configuration, that is often the fastest way to resolve the issue. So you can use Netreo's configuration management tools, for example, to detect unplanned changes, evaluate what changed and when, or look for changes in your compliance status. Really don't want to allow engineering optimism to forward engineer to a new solution unless it's the only option. You also want to make sure you've established clear command lines, one for technical and one for the business interface, and ensure that you've got full management or executive support for the plan that you've developed. It's best for the business side not to participate in the technology calls, as they can very easily be overwhelmed with technical data, which may lead to misunderstandings or misplaced blame. One customer of ours, for example, used to let the business managers on the technical calls, but it led to a situation where no matter what the problem actually was, the last new bit of hardware got blamed for it. So they ended up deinstalling a load balancer on their web cluster in order to fix a routing problem. And it was very hard to convince management to let them put it back in afterwards. You should also plan to overwhelm the problem. And what we mean by that is that to escalate and bring in the key resources, both yours and the vendors where applicable. So don't dribble in resources just because it's 4 o'clock in the morning. If you want to achieve rapid problem resolution, this is how you do it. Get the key resources on the call and ensure that you hold the vendor to the same standards as you hold your team. Obviously, this is going to depend heavily on the incident priority and what resources need to be involved as well. Now, too many alerts can make root cause analysis more difficult, as I said earlier. So I want to take just a second to talk about ways to reduce the amount of alerting noise to try to avoid obscuring the root cause of an incident. Now, as a general rule of thumb, we always recommend reserving active alerts for actionable items only. And what we mean by that is if you're not going to react to a notification as soon as it comes in, you shouldn't be alerting on it. For example, if you're getting alerts when hard drives reach 90% utilization, but then you're just ignoring them because it's not urgent yet, two things are going to happen. First, sooner or later, you're going to get a server failure because you forgot to circle back on that alert before the drive filled up. And second, you're conditioning yourself and your teams to ignore alerts, and someone someday will inevitably ignore the wrong one, and you're going to have a major problem on your hands. So instead, use reports. Configure reports so, for example, every morning I get a list of servers with the lowest free drive space, so I know if I deal with the top entries on that list, I get to sleep through the night. I never have to get that notification. But a key point for success here is to make sure that those reports are fully automated, so nothing gets missed. Some good candidates for this might be some of our built-in reports like time and state or top talkers, so you can see the lowest free drive space or highest CPU utilization over the previous day, or really for any of the different statistics that we might be monitoring, or maybe even use anomaly detection to find unusual changes that might not trigger conventional alarms, but are situations that you might want to be aware of and get reports on so that you can know what happened yesterday that was unusual, for example, without having to get interrupted in the middle of your day. Now, speaking of interruptions, we really need to be able to reliably communicate what's going on to all the teams and stakeholders during a crisis. And importantly, we want to leave a good trail there so we can use that information during the root cause analysis. So the plan should really address exactly how we're going to get notifications to people, and we have to factor in the difficulties that are inherent in a mass outage. Email and SMS are usually the foundation that most notifications are based on, but those might be heavily impacted during a crisis or just totally saturated with different kinds of alerts and notifications, especially if you have multiple monitoring systems. So they also have a very messy trail or no trail at all. So for example, Bob sends an email to Ted about an idea he thinks might solve the problem, but didn't CC the rest of the team. So the rest of the team took off in a totally different direction, but now the only record of that happening is in their email boxes, and it's a total mess. So let's look at alternatives. Like, for example, mobile app push takes a path entirely separate from email, and those can be initiated from the cloud, so the state of the internal networks or systems don't affect it. And if these are being sent from a monitoring system like ours, it's going to have detailed logs of who was notified and when. So when we go back after the fact, we can see exactly what order different kinds of notifications or events happened in. We also strongly recommend using API integrations with team communication platforms, things like Teams or Slack or similar. Team communication platforms like these have some real advantages when it comes to doing root cause analysis, because all the members of the team are going to get aware and informed of what's being done, when and by whom, all at the same time. And there's a perfect record afterwards of everything that was sent and who sent it. And this becomes a tremendously useful resource during the postmortem if you use it properly.
Hey,
We also
James.
want to,
I've
yes.
actually got a quick question here. So question is integration with SMS. Is this directly via SMS gateway?
So you can integrate SMS via a number of different methods. You can go through an email to SMS gateway. You can use an SMS service like Twilio or one of the other online services that provides a gateway. It just depends on exactly your platform and what your form factor for deploying it is, and who gets notified, in what order.
Thanks, James. Sorry for that interruption. Great question there.
No problem. But we also want to make sure that we're leveraging other systems that we're already using. So for example, notification managers like OpsGenie or PagerDuty can simplify the on-call schedules, and this might roll into my SMS notifications, right? I might use something like a PagerDuty as a gateway to control rotation schedules and make sure everybody's getting those SMS messages only when they're on call. And we can use APIs to integrate with those systems to make sure we have a nice, clean, two-way communication between those, and it's not dependent on my internal mail infrastructure. A lot of organizations also use a ticketing or ITSM system like ServiceNow or Sharewell. We're going to want to make sure that the plan includes how we're going to integrate those with the monitoring and alerting systems, as well as the incident management and escalation process around those systems. We should also make sure that we're really reducing over alerting, leveraging the tools that we have. So one of the easiest things we can do is take advantage of built-in technologies like root cause detection. So automated root cause detection is probably not going to get you to the ultimate root cause, and we'll talk about that later, but it will help considerably by eliminating a lot of possible causes and by drastically reducing the number of alerts that are generated during a major incident, which will reduce the distractions and avoid unneeded troubleshooting time. By allowing our tools to discover or configuring a topology into the tools, you can allow the tool to determine, for example, that the reason all the remote devices at that location suddenly went unreachable is because the WAN router went down. So instead of sending out notifications for every switch, server, application, and access point at that location, instead I get a single alert that points me to the WAN router. So we need to make sure we're using a system that doesn't send alerts for things that are cut off by topology failures. And if we can discover that topology automatically, more the better. Now, when it comes to determining root cause, one of the best systems that we've found is something called the 5 whys. And this method is a well-established method for root cause analysis. It has the advantage of being one of the very easiest to use and implement. So even if you've got no procedures in place today, it's very easy to pick up and run with this. It was actually created originally by Sakeichi Toyoda as part of the Toyota production process. And the technique became an integral part of the lean management philosophy. It allows you to get beyond the technical cause of the problem and get to the true root cause of the problem. So in its simplest form, it simply means asking, why did that happen 5 times for every problem? Although it may take fewer or more to get to the real cause of a problem. But it's often not at all what you expected it was. Very often what appears to have been a technical issue was originally caused by a human factor or a process failure. It's also important to make sure that you're involving the technical experts in the root cause analysis process. Now that seems obvious, but we see this happening in management suites all the time without it. And it makes nothing but sense to include the people with the practical experience, since they can give you the most valuable information regarding any particular problem that appears in their area of expertise. So let's look at a simple example of how this process works. So we need to start by stating the problem, and it's usually best to come up with a written description of the problem that we can clearly define what we're looking at. So if the problem has too wide of a scope, root cause analysis is going to become a time-consuming exercise and the boundaries are going to blur. So we want to be as focused as possible in order to find an effective solution quickly. It helps if everyone has the same definition to work from, but don't spend a lot of time arguing over the exact specifics of the wording. I mean, we've all been through that meeting and it's not productive. We want the problem statement to be succinct and to the point. So let's start with a simple example. The Irvine site went offline. So the first thing we need to ask is, why did that happen? Well, it turns out we lost connection to the remote site router, and this is the obvious proximate cause of the problem. So bear with me for a second and let's ask, okay, well, why did that happen? Well, it seems like the WAN provider connection went down, and this is clearly something we don't have direct control over. So a lot of organizations are going to stop right here and chalk it up to problems outside of our control. But what happens if we keep asking why? Well, it turns out the connection went down, but the reason it broke connectivity is that we didn't have a backup line to that location. So why was that? Aha, okay, so the equipment that was ordered and specified for that location didn't have the correct ports for a redundant link. So now we have something we can address if we want to prevent this specific type of outage again, and now we know how to do it. And we can make a clear plan to fix that. But let's ask why one more time. So the issue was that the person who specified the order wasn't told about the need for a redundant link, so they spec'd the equipment without it. So now we also have a process failure we can address to proactively prevent future sites from having this problem. And we can train the people involved to truly address the root cause of the problem. Now, there's a few things that we can do to improve our success using this method. And one of the first ones is to pick a specific leader for the root cause analysis who can keep the team focused during the process. And this might be the incident lead, or it might be a member of senior management, especially if the analysis is being done well after the problem is resolved. Another key point here, though, is to not ask too many whys. Now, while it might take more or less than 5 to get to the actual root of the problem, it's kind of important to know when to stop digging. And going too deep down that rabbit hole can generate dozens of suggestions and complaints, and that's really not the goal here. So it can take a little practice to know when a good time to stop is. But if you start getting a lot of off-topic explanations or things that are only tangentially related to the problem, it's a good indicator that you've reached the bottom. Also, keep in mind that sometimes you might have more than one root cause for a problem, and in those cases, you might have to split your analysis into several causes and run the 5 whys on each of them. So once we reached a specific conclusion about the root cause, our work isn't done. You need to decide on the corrective action. We need to assign specific action items to individuals to make sure they're completed and that someone is responsible for observing the results of those changes. So sometime after the correction actions are completed, the team should meet again to check to see if the actions had the intended positive impact. Because if not, we may need to repeat the process because we may have missed a key cause. Once complete, the case should then be documented and ideally sent out to the whole organization. Sharing this information can give insight to other teams about what kind of problems your team faces and how you confront and eliminate them and make sure they don't happen again. It also kind of helps with that traditional IT problem of, if nothing ever goes wrong, why do we have an IT team? And then if everything is going wrong, why do we have an IT team? So if they know the kind of problems that you're facing and how you're addressing and fixing them, it actually helps build trust in the IT organization across the entire enterprise. Now, the 5 whys technique is a simple and effective tool for solving problems. It helps the team focus on finding the root cause of any problem, but it also encourages each team member to share ideas for continuous improvement rather than blaming others. And this encourages honest and open dialogue, which leads to real problem solving instead of a fear of repercussions. It can also give your team the confidence that they can eliminate and overcome any problem and prevent that problem from recurring again. So let's look at one more example of how this can help us get to the root cause of a problem. Again, we start with a simple statement of the problem. In this case, the ordering application failed and customers were therefore unable to place orders. So now let's start digging into the causes. Why did the application fail? Okay, well, it lost connection to the database. So why did that happen? Well, the database cluster went offline. Great, okay. Now why did that happen? Well, it turns out that the SAN switch that the cluster was using failed. Okay, now we have a technical cause. we need to replace that switch. But why did that break the application? Well, it turns out we didn't have redundant switches for the database servers. Okay, so now I know I've got a single point of failure. It failed, it caused this problem. I can address that. I can replace that device. I can put in redundancy now and address that and prevent that from happening again. But what if we ask why one more time? Aha, so the previous CFO capped the budget for the project and we didn't have enough funding to add redundancy at all the layers of the design. And as you can see in this example, the real root cause of the problem went way beyond the technology and was based on a previous policy decision. And at least now we can report the findings and give the business leaders and executives the information they need to make the proper decisions. We might also revisit how the redundancy in the other layers of the application was implemented originally to make sure there aren't more single points of failure hiding out and proactively prevent any kind of similar outages. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kyle, just for a brief overview of who Netreo is for those of you who haven't worked with us before. Kyle?
Yeah, thanks, James. So I see that many of you are not Netreo users. It's actually fantastic. I think we've got attendees from just about every corner of the world today. Really awesome to see. So founded in 2000, Netreo has been in the business of full stack monitoring for over 2 years, or I'm sorry, 2 decades. Users of the Netreo platform come from all over the globe in just about every industry you can think of. And the Netreo platform plays extremely well in industries that are highly regulated like finance, aerospace, and transportation, require high reliability and scalability like healthcare and life sciences, and have real-time mission criticality like emergency services. So backed by years of data and multiple patents, Netreo is recognized as a leader in IT management and monitoring. Netreo has been recognized as Computing's Monitoring Product of the Year for 4 straight years. We were recently named a high performer in G2 Crowd's Enterprise Monitoring, Network Monitoring, and IT Alerting Grid reports. Netreo was also the highest rated vendor based on customer reviews in the most recent Gartner Peer Insights Voice of the Customer report, and just recently named to the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list for the 4th consecutive year. So we have some time left, so I want to open up the floor for some additional questions. And while we do so, I'm actually going to pop up a quick poll here. So while we're answering these questions, feel free to fill out this poll and we'll get those submitted. So James, this looks like a question for you. From your experience, what are 3 of the top root causes you've noticed for systems being down?
So that's a bit of a tough one because there's really such a wide variety of things that can, cause an effective outage to a system or to an application. The first one is easy though, because it's almost always undocumented configuration changes. That's probably at least 50% of outages are caused by human error in configurations. And so that's why it's important to have a configuration change management process in place, but also a monitoring system that can monitor for configuration changes and alert you when unexpected changes happen to make it really easy to quickly identify the cause of the problem and revert those changes if that is in fact, what's causing a particular outage. I would say the second most common one is actually usually hardware failure. Power supplies die, networking equipment occasionally fails, switches fail, network interface cards fail. Those kinds of outages usually shouldn't cause an application to go down. But again, if there's gaps in the redundancy or resiliency of the way the application was designed or implemented, they very often can, and they'll certainly cause a system outage, if not a overall application outage. And so that's why we take the approach of trying to monitor at both levels, monitoring down to the system and the hardware level, so you can know when that's causing a particular problem, but also monitoring application availability and doing application layer monitoring so that you can know whether or not that small hardware failure actually had an impact on your application or your users, so that you can better report your SLAs and make sure that you're meeting the expectations that are laid for you, by your constituents, whether those be internal departments or outside customers or vendors. If I had to go to a third one, I'd probably say the next most common is WAN failure. And so that's why it's really important to have redundancy built in at the WAN layer, whether that's multiple ISPs with separate VPN routing and paths, or whether that's redundant MPLS networks, or whether it's even things like having a cellular backup router available to fail over to in the event of a primary systems failure. And that's one of the reasons why when we monitor WAN environments, we encourage customers to monitor all of the different possible paths to a remote site so that we can differentiate when we send out an alarm whether the problem is that a particular interface or a WAN link has gone down, or whether an entire site has become unreachable because of a failure in the backup configuration, or a backup router that didn't work, or even after you recover from an outage like that, if the cellular modem stays hooked up and doesn't fail back over, you can end up with a really large unexpected data bill. So being able to kind of monitor all of those different aspects is really important to be able to manage those kinds of outages.
Great question and awesome answer, James. Thanks for going into some depth there. So I think I can handle this question. So it's related to our poll here. So what is the Netreo swap out program? So Netreo swap out program, we're offering special pricing for the Netreo platform. This is a kind of a COVID-19 special. But really what we're doing is we're offering a 10% the Netreo platform for 10% off of your current annual monitoring vendor subscription or annual maintenance fee. In addition to that, you'll be getting a turnkey implementation of the Netreo platform for free. So there's no transition costs, anything like that. And then we'll be providing additional functionality at no extra cost for the first year for either our Microsoft 365 Insight module or our AIOps Autopilot modules. So yeah, feel free to select that option. We're happy to provide more information on that, get you a demo of the Netreo platform. So I have another question here. James, so how does Netreo enable AIOps? Is it using big data technologies?
So that's a good question, and our approach to AIOps has been to try to make it a practical technology. So looking for ways that we can leverage AI and machine learning to deliver an actual ROI to customers and make it something practical, as opposed to just a nice fancy term or a fluffy marketing thing. So like our first AIOps module, Autopilot, is focused on tuning the monitoring platform itself to reduce false positives or redundant alarms, to reduce the number of alert noise that goes out. So automatically, profiling all of your thresholds and baselining the environment to be able to either suggest or automatically implement changes to the way that you're monitoring systems to reduce the amount of noise that are being generated in the environment. It'll also look for things like frequent problems that aren't being addressed. So maybe that's a setting that needs to be adjusted, or if you've got things that aren't configured according to best practices, it'll make suggestions as to how you might improve the monitoring of those particular systems or make it more streamlined. And of course, those recommendations can be implemented automatically with just a click of a button, or you can even empower the system to do all of those changes for you automatically. So the idea is that we're trying to alleviate some of the administrative work of keeping the system tuned and adjusted to your environment using those AI and machine learning technologies. And some of those are based off, trained machine learning models. We're certainly leveraging big data technologies like, trained models and trained algorithms. And what we're trying to do is centralize that processing up in the cloud and then be able to push down representative algorithms from those models to individual customer systems so that they don't have to take on the burden of doing all of the AI processing, but they can take advantage of, kind of the cumulative learning across the entire customer base. So it's a little off topic for today, but that's sort of our approach with it. And of course, we'd love to have a conversation with you that's more specifically on, AI ops technologies offline.
All right, so it looks like, James, we had one more question come in. You might be able to answer this. So when will the cloud-based Netreo be ready so I can migrate from CloudMonix?
So there's kind of two answers to this question, because the first one is Netreo's core platform as a cloud-based product is available now, and it's actually got a new release coming out in a few weeks here that is expected to essentially give it complete feature parity with having an on-premise appliance. So it's it's going to be a seamless transition at that point. Some of the features that CloudMonix has, however, like certain types of objects that it's monitoring in Azure, for example, are going to take a little bit more integration. And the latest word from product management is that we're expecting those CloudMonix features to be integrated into the Netreo enterprise cloud platform in October. So about another month or so, and we should have a really good story to tell about how we've taken all of that CloudMonix technology and really rolled it into and incorporated it into the core Netreo platform as well. And of course, either are available as as web-based platforms today.
Yeah, and one thing I will add, so as a CloudMonix customer, you actually have access to a 100 device license of the Netreo platform for free. So we'll definitely have your account manager reach out to you and provide more detail on that. Okay, so let's see. Do you know if Netreo is on a South Carolina state term contract?
That is not a question I know off the top of my head. I would actually have to get with the sales folks to answer that one. So we'll reach out after the webinar and try to get an answer back directly to you on that.
Okay, and then looks like we have one more question. Do you have partners in Europe? Yes, actually we do. We have several partners in Europe. Specifically in Switzerland, we work with a company called Emitech, and in Germany, we work with a company called ICS. So if you have any other questions on that, we're happy to get you more information and pass you over to them. Okay. And we're also in the UK, so I will add that. Alrighty, so I think that, let's see, one last question. We're running short on time here. So the other question is, how do we receive the Yeti tumbler? I know that's what lots of you came for. We're happy to get those out. So you'll receive an email about 2 hours from now, including the webinar recording and a link to a Google form to submit your preferred shipping address. Again, the Yeti offer is only for US customers just because of shipping and handling. But for international attendees, we will be providing Amazon gift cards. So just because of COVID and shipping delays and all that, just make sure you give us a couple weeks to get that handled. And if you have any questions regarding that, feel free to email me. My information will be included in the follow-up email. So I think that covers all of our questions. James, thanks again for the great content and the great answers to all the questions. So with that, I think we'll call it a day and wrap it up. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. If you have any additional questions or you're interested in a demo, please feel free to visit netreo.com, click request a demo. You can also try out a free trial, and we're happy to get in touch. With that, enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks everyone for your time.